Great. So thanks, guys, for coming to the session today, Net Promoter System. The session is getting the most out of your NPS campaign using Pendo. So this is going to be definitely Pendo heavy, but we will go over what NPS is, the cliff notes of that, why it's important, why people use it, some nuances around it. We will get into the product and talk about how you can use NPS in Pendo and get a lot of insight and do a lot of things with it. And we'll talk about best practices. So to start, introduce myself. I'm Beth Greenberg. I'm one of the customer success managers here at Pendo. I've been with Pendo since November of 2016, so almost half of the company's lifespan, which is crazy. And I am from North Carolina, so if you are interested in knowing barbecue recommendations or fried chicken, just let me know. I'll be happy to help. This is also, I'm used to moving around, so if you can't hear me, let me know. I'll probably try to move around and talk to you guys as we get going with everything. So Net Promoter Score, first and foremost, show of hands, who knows what Net Promoter Score is? I'm sure everybody does. That's probably why you're here. Who is doing it currently at your company? High hands. Don't be shy. Good. Almost everyone. Who is thinking about doing it at their company, and that's why you're here? Okay, cool. So again, just the cliff notes, just a background so everyone's on the same page. Net Promoter Score is the answer to the ultimate question. It was a book called The Ultimate Question by this guy, Fred, who is from a Bain consulting firm. So this was done back in 2003. So again, the cliff notes of this, what is Net Promoter Score? It is your promoters minus your detractors, percent of promoters minus detractors. So who are your promoters? Your promoters are the people that go into the product, and when you get that question, are you likely to recommend us to a friend or a colleague? If they give you a 9 or a 10, they are considered a promoter. They are green. They are wonderful. They are very happy with the product, and they would go and tell somebody, hey, you should definitely check this out. This is an amazing product. 7s and 8s are considered passive. They are in the yellow, and 6s below is red. Fun fact of why 9 and 10 is considered a promoter. This is actually based on the American grading system. I did not know that until I was doing the research on NPS, and that if you think about it, when you're in school, you get a 9 or a 10 is considered an A or an A+. You're going to get 100% on it. A 7 and an 8 can be a C or a B. It just depends on what schooling system you're going to, what university you went to. And a 6 below is a failing score. You are getting an F. So when someone comes in and gives you a 6 on your NPS, they are basically saying, hey, I'm not pleased with this. This is not a passing grade. They might not necessarily say you're failing, but if we're thinking about the American grading system, absolutely. We will talk about why NPS works so well, especially here locally. And I have had questions about why, it may not work internationally, but this might have something to do with it. So just to go in deeper, NPS can be on a scale from negative 100 all the way to positive 100. So if you have 100 people answering your NPS and 75% of them say, hey, absolutely 9 or a 10, I would absolutely recommend you to a friend or a colleague, 15 passives and 10 detractors, your overall NPS score is a 65. Which would be awesome. If I saw that you were one of my customers and your NPS was a 65, I would say you're going places. That is amazing. So with that, why NPS? Why is it so important? Why do people care about it? Why has it become such a buzzword and such a popular thing that we talk about now? The reason is over 2/3 of Fortune 1000 companies use NPS, and it is actually considered a predictor of growth. Why is it a predictor of growth? It's related back to having long-term customers and having long-term value. So on average, an industry's NPS leader outgrew its competitors by a factor greater than 2. That's huge. If you think about your revenue and you think about your overall valuation, essentially, and you're saying, hey, if I double that or more by having people like me, that's amazing. So it's, of course, overall customer sentiment. Also, promoters have an average lifetime value typically 3 to 8 times that of detractors. Because think about it, your promoters are going to be the ones that are going to stay with you. They like you. They're going to buy more things from you. And your detractors, They're like, oh, I cannot wait to get out of this relationship. It is terrible. And we'll get into that in a little bit more detail. So it increases the lifetime value of your customers. They're going to be the ones that are going to stick around, and they're going to be the ones promoting you and providing referrals. So this gets into the notion of good and bad profits. So this is why I believe that NPS is actually a company sentiment and not necessarily owned by the product or by the customer success team or by the marketing team. It's a company sentiment. And what I mean by good and bad profits is your promoters, those are considered good profits. They're going to be the ones that you can rely on. You're more likely to forecast them in your renewals. They're going to come back, and again, they have a longer lifetime value with the company. Your detractors, like I said, they're in a bad relationship. They're ready to get out as soon as possible. So if you think about it, I've heard a couple of customers talk about their own experience with some products, and they're like, you know, it's a terrible product, but we have to stick with them right now because our renewal is not up for 6 months. So think about it. Your at-risk customers, as soon as they are out of their contract, they're not coming back, and they're not going to renew, they're not going to pay you, and more than likely, they're not going to come back. So NPS methodology. So now that we've gone over the why and why it's become this big thing and why people believe in it, let's talk about the who, what, when, how, and all of that fun stuff. So who should you NPS? Ideally, you should NPS everyone. You do want to get an overall sentiment from your customer base of how they feel about your company. You want to know, you want to get a good baseline for all of that, and you want to make sure that you hit everyone as much as possible to get feedback. That's invaluable to get that directly from your customers. Now, with that, there are different approaches that you can take for who you want to NPS, and that can be based on certain segments. Of course, everyone in here is very familiar with Pendo and the ability to create segments, but a couple of things to think about. Product user versus end user. A good example that I like to give is I work with a couple of education SaaS companies. They work with schools, and so teachers log in, and so do students. They're going to be interacting with the product very differently. They're going to be using the product very differently, so they'll probably segment the students versus the teachers when they do their NPS campaign. So definitely think about the different goals that they have and the different personas. I know that's going to be something that you guys probably have talked about quite a bit here at Pandemonium. Access level. Access level is huge. I have, this even happens internally at Pendo. We'll NPS, and there's different permissions or access level. And so we'll get feedback, and the feedback is, oh, I really, really wish that Pendo could do this, or I had the ability to do this. And actually, they do. They just don't have the permission to do it. So think about when you are doing NPS, that when you're doing your analysis or when you're administering your NPS, if you're doing it on segments, knowing who you're focusing on, who you're targeting, and then again, when you get that data back, knowing who you're taking a look at and why. Sample groups. So this is huge. This is actually the approach that we take internally here at Pendo. We actually do 25% of our user base every quarter. We'll get into cadence and schedule for your NPS, but this is extremely helpful because that allows us to have a randomized group throughout the year. So we can have a constant and steady pulse on our customers and getting that feedback in so we can make changes based on what's coming in. Things change over the year. You know, everybody's doing releases. Everybody's trying to change their product. You may have different sentiment throughout the year. So having that sample group and randomized group during certain times can be extremely helpful to have an ongoing feedback loop. Based on page and feature usage, you can absolutely do that. Paid versus unpaid accounts. This is huge. I do have a lot of customers that have trial accounts, and they'll NPS both. But again, they'll have different approaches, different playbooks for each of them, again, just based on their access level and if they're paid versus unpaid, and language. So thinking about culture, I did have one customer they're a global customer, as probably a lot of you are here in the room, and they did NPS worldwide. And they were able, when they got the information back, to take a look at the segments based on language. And they realized that their customers in Japan gave an extremely different NPS score than their customers in the US. And again, there's a lot of things that can go into that. As I mentioned, NPS is actually based on the American grading system. So that could be something that's completely foreign and different in other countries. But if you have the ability to segment this information, I highly recommend doing it. So that way, when you are taking a look at the feedback feedback that's coming in, you have context around it and be like, okay, this is our baseline for our Japanese users, this is our baseline for the American users, which I'll show you how to do when we get into Pendo. So far, so good? Everybody having a good time? More fun than karaoke last night? Yeah. Yeah. We actually do 25% off of all customers. So yes, with the random sampling, when you're using Pendo, you have each user has an individual number on a scale of 0 to 99. You can do 25% or 20%, just depending on how often you want to do the NPS. So what question are you going to ask? So this is where NPS, one of the benefits of NPS is it is so simple. And I get a lot of people that are like, well, can't I ask a ton more questions? You absolutely can. You can definitely ask a lot of questions, but you want to think about, all right, how is the quickest way that I can get feedback from my customers in the most efficient way? And what can we handle on our back end when we're getting all of this information in? So ideally, the basic thing with NPS is that it's going to have the standard question, would you recommend us to a friend or colleague, followed by a qualitative response. So we highly recommend staying in this route unless you have another strategy to get additional information. So you may add a couple of follow-up questions, but our recommendation and best practice is keep it as simple as possible. That way you can get a higher response rate, and again, why complicate things? So here, of course, is the keep it simple, the simple questions in here. And I had someone suggest when I went through a dry run on this that I should probably provide some data around people's attention spans. And fun fact, people always compare a human to a goldfish, and goldfish actually have a lot higher attention spans than people realize. So I thought that was going to be irrelevant. So instead, I thought this quote would be extremely helpful for why to keep things simple. Complexity is your enemy. Any fool can make something complicated. It is hard to keep things simple. Ask a simple question, and you'll probably be able to get a simple answer, and you can be actionable off of it. So the takeaway there, of course, is keep it as simple as possible. So this is when the beat drops. When do you want to do your NPS? That, again, depends on your overall strategy. So a lot of my customers ask me, well, when should I do this? And I think it needs to have a bigger conversation, a broader conversation of your company's initiatives and your company's approaches to things. So for us, we do it on a quarterly basis. We do it by a schedule. Other companies do it by a milestone. So remember the 2 M's when we're talking about NPS, monthly milestone. You can think schedule, milestone. So it really depends on your company and your user base. You know your user base a lot better than we do, so you know how they're going to interact with you. So this is a wonderful quote that is fantastic from the CEO of Zola. Who knows Zola in here? So it's a wedding registry site, and they actually have been named one of the top 25 companies to watch, a startup. But they have been doing NPS for a while now. And they've gotten some amazing results, and they've been able to increase their NPS score by 50% by following a few items. For example, reach out when your customer is ready to give feedback, and when they have a good basis for that feedback, not when it's most convenient for you as a company. And to illustrate that more, this is when they do NPS, and it's very strategic, and I love it. So has anyone planned a wedding in here, or been in a wedding, or been around a wedding? Me, yes, You know, it can get kind of crazy. So the first time they do NPS is after a milestone, when someone comes in to set up their registry in their site. So they're typically just engaged. They are so happy. Life is good. Oh my gosh, and we can go in and set up all this stuff that people are going to buy us. This is amazing. I love this site. It's the best thing that's ever happened. So that's when they get their first NPS survey. Then, of course, what happens is wedding invites are sent, and you're like, oh my gosh, Uncle Tim can't sit next to Aunt Tracy. What are we going to do here? It's extremely stressful leading up to the actual wedding. And then right after the wedding is the honeymoon, and life is good. You're in that honeymoon phase, which, of course, you use for a lot of different terms, and that's when they get their second NPS survey. So this is strategic, but it's when the user is ready and willing to give feedback. Questions, comments? All right. How? How are we going to do NPS? Well, of course, our recommendation is to do it in-app. It's the most contextual time, the most appropriate time, in my opinion, to get in front of your users. So they're in your app using it, and they're like, okay, somebody asked me a question about it, I'm going to answer it. So ideally, you're going to get a much higher response rate, and of course, it's going to be less bias. I had a couple of customers that have done it in previous methods. They had email. There's other companies that'll do it by phone call. And one company actually used to do it by phone call, and they were like, God, we got the best feedback. People were so happy. But I'm sorry, if somebody calls you and says, hey, and they're so nice to you, and they're like, would you recommend this company? You know, I know you've been a customer for a really long time, and they really just want feedback because you've been such a good customer for them. Are you going to give a good or bad response to someone that's actually talking to you on the phone? I mean, I'm from the South. I try not to sugarcoat everything, but I do. And so I would be like, oh my gosh, they're wonderful. I love them so much. And then probably if I go off of that, I'd probably be not too happy about it. So in the app is much more unbiased. Of course, you can email, but everyone's getting emails a lot now, and you just don't necessarily get as much of a response rate. This is actually one way to illustrate that is one of our customers, Henry Schein. They started NPS in Q1 of 2016, and they got 80 responses from their customer base. They did it in the next quarter in-app with Pendo and got 800 responses. If anybody went to WorkWave's session yesterday, Mike, he's awesome, great product guy. They started NPS as well, and they used to get very low responses through email, very, very low. I think he said something like it was like less than 100 or something like that. And then they did Pendo NPS, and they got 1,500 responses in one day. They have a huge user base as well, but they were able to get a much higher response rate. So the caveat of this, of course, the upside is you're getting a ton of feedback. The downside is you have to be ready for it. Having some sort of playbook, and I know people are like, playbook, what does that mean? It's, you have to be either on defense or offense and making sure that you know what you're going to do if you're getting all this information back. There's a couple of things that you can put into place and automate that we'll talk about here in a little bit. Benchmarking. So once you do, yeah, question. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. That is something that you have to be ready for, of course, because you are going to get much more responses. And for instance, if you're thinking about just someone who is using your product and they might not be happy, if they get an email from that particular company, are they going to open it or not if they're like super excited about them? They're not that excited, so they're probably gonna be like, I don't have time for this, I'm gonna move on. But if they are getting into the app and they have that question presented, and they're like, actually, I've had some frustrations that, this is the opportune time to get in front of them. I have a couple of seconds just to fill it out and submit it in. That is definitely something that's happened before, especially if you're going from phone to email and then in product, you're gonna have different responses. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good question. So the question was, do you want it to pop up right away, or do you want it to wait a little bit? So the biggest thing is you want to make sure that it's in a place, and this has to do with your product as well, that it's in a place that doesn't necessarily interrupt something that's crucial. For example, we have a customer that does emergencies called pager duty. They work with like doctors, and so when people are logging in, they don't want to be like interrupted like, oh, do you like us? And they're like, I'm just trying to get to an emergency. So it has to be extremely contextual. So with that, what we do, because for us, it's not necessarily an emergency when you're getting into Pendo, although releases can feel like an emergency, it's not necessarily one. So when we have it, we actually have people that are active at least for within the last 30 days. So they have had to have logged in at least 30 days ago. So they're not necessarily brand new. We had to change that actually, because when we initially had Pendo, we just did it for everyone, didn't really matter, and someone was like, this is my first day, I really don't have a sentiment. So you want to make sure that it is something where they're at least familiar with who you are. We have it site-wide minus our login page. That was another thing that we learned. I highly recommend checking out our blog post, six things that we learned from 6 months of NPS. These are all the things that we listed from the initial NPS that we did. But we had it on our login page, and someone was like, I didn't even log in yet. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm brand new. So you have to make sure that it's contextual. It has to do with your app, so it depends on who your users are and what they're doing when they're coming in. Make sense? All right, benchmark. So with any sort of initiative, you absolutely want to benchmark, and there's two ways to do this, bottom up and top down. Bottom up is benchmark against yourself. So you may not know, you may be an obscure industry, although we're all in the SaaS industry, and you want to have just that initial baseline to see if you can improve upon that. I actually like this approach. I think it goes back to sports. Obviously, I'm a big sports fan. Go UNC Heels. But in that case, you want to make sure that you have an initial thing where you can go ahead and say, okay, there's a few things where I want to be better. Our company wants to be better. So that's benchmarking against yourself, that bottom-up approach where you may have an initial score. You want to work on that. Top down is benchmarking against your peers. So you might be like, well, what is a good score? There's a ton of information out there. There's npsbenchmarks.com. There's a couple of other sites that we actually take a look at, and you can put in your industry and compare. This one, this screenshot on here is from npsbenchmarks.com. And this has different brands where you can go and you can actually put in your company here and then get the information back. But this was just really interesting, just if you want to see Tesla and Starbucks, what their NPS is. But just to make a point, the important thing is to establish a baseline, whether that's against your peers or against yourself. So making NPS actionable. So this is where we get to go into the fun stuff and pop into Pendo. You all ready? Okay. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay. Who has NPS up and running in Pendo right now? All right, so I'll use a mic so I can be on the thing. We'll move it closer. Okay, who has NPS up and running right now in Pendo? Yes? How long?
Probably over a year at this point.
What company are you from?
Threat Connect.
Threat Connect. You guys are one of my first customers.
Good to meet you in person.
Very nice to meet you in person. So far, so good. So I remember when you guys were getting this set up.
It was a long time ago.
A long time ago. So you guys have a process. What's your schedule? Just give me the quick cliff notes of how you guys have NPS set up.
Sure. We try to poll our entire user base once a year using random samples. We restrict it only to sort of non-critical pages, and we base the segmentation threshold not based on time on site, but basically milestones having used a critical feature.
Nice.
And then we've got a kind of well-documented tactical follow-up process, which
We'll talk about follow-up process. That's awesome to hear. Anybody else has NPS set up? Back there.
We have something similar. We do it to every customer twice a year, but no more than
Okay. Well, we will definitely talk about. Okay. Cool. We definitely have a follow-up process that we'll talk about. Awesome. So the first thing, of course, is to get the information in, and then we can talk about what are next steps. So the big thing here is when you log into Pendo, we have a new place for NPS, if you scroll down here on the left-hand side, because we've built out so much functionality around it that I'm super excited about, because it gives you so much insight into your product. I actually have added a widget on my dashboard so I can easily go to my NPS. So I'm in my awesome Pendo Sandbox account, which is basically a demo account, so we can show data in here that's really cool. So the first thing that you see when you go to the NPS information in Pendo is just your overall response rate, the overall score, views if you're interested in that, and then your distribution of promoters, passives, and detractors. We're at 31% response rate with an NPS score of 10, not too bad. That's going to be our considered baseline. When I go into the poll details, this is where we can really take a look at information that we can make actionable. So what I have in here is after looking at the overall score, response rate, and distribution, I have NPS over time. So this right now is NPS weekly, and you can do it to monthly, weekly, or daily based on the time frame that you have set up here. And the way that I like to describe this graph is that it's NPS related to real life. So what happened over this time period? Maybe you guys had a release, it was super buggy, people weren't really happy, and your NPS took a dip. So in that case, you can say, all right, those scores can be related back to something that happened in real life. And vice versa. Maybe you had a release, all of these features that people have been asking for, they've been waiting for. It's like you answered their questions and their NPS qualitative response or prayers. And then you have that score go directly back up, so you can relate it back to your current company initiative. So I would definitely look at it in that perspective. Going down, this is where it also gets cool, where you can see what areas of your product are areas of elation and areas of frustration. So in here, it's either page or feature usage on a spectrum of detractors versus promoters. And let me tell you, when we did this in Pendo, we found so much. We didn't realize that certain areas of the product people really, really liked, or at least the promoters were spending a ton of time there. So in this case, you can see, you can drag your cursor over, and everybody can see this, okay, right? But you can drag your cursor over to the different pages and or features on the spectrum. So over here, now this is a little over on the end of the spectrum, but these pages are where the promoters are spending a lot of their time. So promoters are only spending time on these pages. Detractors are spending their time over here, so that can identify areas of frustrations. So what do you do next? You may want to encourage users to go to the areas that people are getting value out of. You can do that, of course, through in-app messages and guides, setting feature and page goals around within Pendo to understand, okay, we want people using this information more, or even doing some UI redesign. I had a customer do that to find certain areas that people really found valuable, to find it easier. So definitely take a look at this to see where your detractors are spending time, where your promoters are spending time, so you can really pinpoint your action items.
Can you do like 60 more seconds on that? So everybody's being surveyed at the same point by Pendo?
So not necessarily. So this is over this period of time right here.
Where they're spending their time on pages, detractors, promoters, so everybody's being surveyed consistently, and then
Right.
spending more time here, promoters here.
Right. So, and one thing that's also really
Opposed to, you're not surveying like one person on one page and one on another.
correct. So this is like site-wide. This is just basically taking their NPS responses and tracking that back to product usage. So one thing that's really helpful in here as well, and that's why this is more on a spectrum, is you can see the length or the vertical length of the line actually talks about how many responses we have for that particular page. So for that particular page usage, we've had a certain amount of promoters, a certain amount of passes, and a certain amount of detractors. So much more than over here, where you can see we only had 2 promoters and 1 passive. So that's why it's pushing this page over here on the promoter side of the spectrum, because we only got responses primarily from promoters on that particular page. Well, that use that particular page.
There's one more question I'll show.
Yeah. No, you're good.
So you've got different types of, so you're looking at everybody.
Mm-hmm.
You've got different types of users, presumably. You then start kind of drilling in and saying, yeah, they
Yep.
don't like this page, but maybe they shouldn't. Because
Yep.
it doesn't apply to them.
Yeah, absolutely. So then you actually start drilling in. And where I actually like to drill in first is this scatter plot. Because, yeah, you will start drilling into these actual pages to take a look at those particular users. However, this is another area where you can drill into the people that actually responded to your NPS. So this is your total score, your total usage versus score. And we focus on 4 different quadrants in here. Your high usage detractors, high usage promoters, and then vice versa. So why I like this is I actually came from another SaaS company, and all we cared about was whether or not they were using the product. We were like, if they are using the product, if they are spending a ton of time in the product, they are absolutely going to renew, because why not? Why would they not do that? But if I focus into my high usage detractors, the data would tell me that these are people that are using the product a ton, so I would assume that they're going to renew. But when in actuality, these are the people that I'm talking about that are in a bad relationship. They actually don't really like us, so they're probably shopping around for the competitor for something else. So there are a couple of things I can do with this particular graph right here. I can actually generate a CSV first. The second thing I can do is I can drill into that user specifically. Can everybody see that? Okay, so you can drill into this user specifically so you can see their activity, and you can actually go to their actual visitor details page within Pendo to take a look at that actual information. So what that user is doing, where they are spending their time, and then see if that correlates back to any of this in here. And then, of course, you can also filter as well with your segments based on response rate at this point, but that might be helpful as you go into the other areas in analytics and Pendo. So far, so good? All right. And then on the other side of that, I do want to point out you also have the ability to identify your high usage promoters. These are the people you want to contact for your referrals, for your case studies. They're probably the people right here sitting in front of me. I'm going to talk to you guys about being a referral. It's going to be amazing. You're in the product all the time. You like Pendo. You come to Pendemonium. These are the people that we're going to identify for G2 Crowd surveys, not surveys, but reviews. And so have all of that information in one place. NPS by something. So NPS by segment. So this goes back to that initial slide where I was talking about, all right, you want to analyze based on the different segments or user types that you have. Pendo sets that up for you. So you have NPS by, let's go for language. So in here, we can see that there is a different score based on the language. So this is any piece of metadata field that you guys are passing us. So everyone has a different Pendo setup, so it depends on what you have available. But in this case, we do have language available, so we have the ability to segment off of it and automatically see the number of detractors, passive promoters, and the overall NPS score based on segment. And then lastly, your overall poll responses, quantitative, qualitative results. So this is what you see within Pendo. There's a lot you can do there, but I think it's important to talk about what do you do next. Questions? Good. All right, let's go back into here and talk about best practices and what you can do next. Okay, so best practices, getting the most out of your NPS campaign. Going back to, we do believe that this is a company-wide initiative. So having some sense of being able to share this information with the company. There's a couple of ways that you can do this. We actually do have an integration, and it depends, again, what products that you guys use internally. But we have a couple of integrations. We have a Zapier integration. If you're not familiar with Zapier, it's a triggering product. It is free to a certain amount. I don't work for Zapier, so I don't know that much about it. However, it's a great tool to use that we actually use internally, where we can trigger whenever we get an NPS response rate, we do a couple of things. First, we have automated emails that go out to the people that answered the NPS, and we have different emails based on if they're a promoter, passive, or detractor. We also have a Slack channel called Project NPS. So using Zapier, anytime we get a response, that goes straight to NPS. So first, let's talk about the NPS email follow-up. So these are just a couple of snippets from the emails that we send out that we've done on an automated basis. I've seen other companies that do this through Salesforce and even Gainsight. So again, it just depends on what you guys have available. So in this case, for our promoters, we specifically ask, would you be open to reviewing us on G2 Crowd? Over the past, I think it's 6 months that we added this to our promoter email, our reviews in G2 Crowd have grown over 250%. We are now the 4th highest company in the Raleigh area, which is huge for us, that have the most G2 Crowd reviews. So this small change that we added to our promoter email has really got us back a lot of value. For passives, why we care about passives is we want to take them up a notch. It's much easier to have a passive go from an 8 to a 9 versus a detractor of a 0 getting all the way up to a promoter. So this is actually a sweet spot for us where we can really focus on this area to help knock it up just a little bit so then they can become a Pendo fan. So in this case, we asked, what is the one thing that we can improve upon? For a detractor, we get into gear and we ask for a call right away. We used to have an email that I actually liked that said, hey, are we really that bad? And we got a lot of responses from it. So, but in this case, we are extremely proactive with our detractors. We do want to get feedback as fast as possible. So it's an email follow-up after they answer. Now, within Pendo, you can set up to have a success message at the end based on what they answer, or change the qualitative question based on if they give you a detractor, passive, or promoter. This is just an email so we can communicate with them from a CSM. So right now, this comes from our success team. So when they do answer back, we get it directly and we can work with them right away. And then we can, of course, pull in the resources that we need to the product team. But it's just this gives us the ability to have a direct line of communication with them. They don't think it's an automated response. How do we do that? Through Zapier. It's actually from our nice friend Adam Lohner. So if anybody's got an email from Adam Lohner, it wasn't really from Adam, but it's from an actual email, because you can set it up through Gmail. So we use Gmail. So you can set it up from an actual email in Gmail, so it looks like an actual email from a real person. So we get a ton of response from that. Mm-hmm. No, we're not, right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and honestly, it might have to do with your customer base as well, because if I send out an email, if an email comes out from Pendo and we're sending it to some people in this room. Sometimes product people like to talk to us because they want to help make the product better, because they're product people, they kind of get it. But in your industry, it might be a little bit different. So maybe we could tweak the message a little bit to see if there's like some things that work, some things that don't work. We can get into A/B testing. So that's usually what I start to work with customers when they come to me and say, well, we don't really get a response rate. So that's one option. The other option is, once you do get these responses, you can segment in Pendo based on score and maybe do another in-app guide. So then it's right in front of them, and so you can say, hey, I noticed that you answered that you a better word than detractor. Hey, you're a detractor. Hey, I noticed that you might have some frustrations in our product. Can you take a second to give us some additional feedback? Or would you be open to connecting with us? And you can absolutely do that in app by segmenting based on their NPS response. Does that help? Cool. So this would be considered a follow-up type thing. So it's possible that response for a follow-up campaign may not be as high, but however, any feedback can be good feedback. So if we can get anything, that's better than none. The second thing we do is we actually have all of our NPS scores go into a Slack channel. So we, as a company, are very transparent, and we believe that this is a company-wide initiative. So again, anytime anyone answers, it goes right here. So you can see this is actually a real NPS response. We've just redacted all of the personal information. So someone gave us some great feedback, and you can see on the right-hand side that their CSM, as well as one of our sales engineers, jumped in to say, hey, we need to pull in either Todd on this, or we need to pull in our product person so we can get to them right away. And so we've been able to have some great cross-functional work just based on the responses that we get and everyone being able to see them. I will say Todd gets into that channel a lot, and he asks if we get any sort of response that he finds interesting, he will get in there and be like, what are we doing with this right now? So it's extremely helpful to have, to be transparent with that and have cross-collaboration across the different departments. Every single NPS response. It's with the 25% of our user base and with the response rate, we do have a double-digit response rate, which is great. Usually there's an influx at the very beginning of the campaign. However, we're actually going to be changing that with our new NPS smoothing, if you guys have heard of that, where it's going to be smoothing out the responses over a period of time. So it's not overwhelming. In that case, we'd rather, again, have it. So I will say we'll probably get at most in a day 10, and that's like the highest in the Slack channel. But then we, again, have our processes in place to respond to them. Questions? Cool. Here's one of our customers, that Becky from Tran Kai, who has NPS. The two things to note here is they had a 20% response rate over a 10% through email. But the biggest thing that I want to note here is they actually have a screen of their NPS score always in their office available for that people walk by. And apparently it became the most popular television screen for people to take a look at. So that was the way that they got it in front of everyone else. So again, it depends on your culture, what you guys have. I know we just added TV screens in our new office, and I'm like, hey, we should do something like this. That'd be awesome. I also like to showcase customers on a side note. But in this case, I think it's really great just to think about your own company culture, how you guys can get this information in front of others. Now, other best practices, as I mentioned, where you guys want to make your focus. So I find that taking a look at passives are very opportune to actually get feedback from them and help them get to promoter state. As I mentioned, it's a lot more difficult to take someone from a 0 to a 9 or a 10 versus someone that's at a 7 or an 8. And I've talked to a lot of companies, and they're like, oh, we typically don't care about our passives. They're just fine. You know, they're just like okay. And we focus on our detractors. And of course, it's really important to focus on your detractors because they are your guide. They can definitely be a guide for all of the things that are very helpful for feedback for your product. But here with passives, you can definitely take a look at them, start theming out their responses, and making some action plans if there's something that is constant from them. So here this talks about which themes should you prioritize. So you may want to take a look at the themes with the promoters. And again, you can do that through the data in Pendo, just taking a look at first the actual page and feature usage, the time spent within your site, and then taking a look at the qualitative responses to start to theme them out. I recommend doing this for all of your promoters, so then you can double down and say, hey, everybody else, you should take a look at these areas. This is awesome. Everybody else loves it. For your passive, same thing. Start to theme it out. If there's any feedback that helps you be a better product or do better, start to take that information and see, can we build this out? You guys a lot of you are product managers, so you can make those decisions. And then for your detractors, again, you definitely want to mitigate those risks. It's not that you want to say, oh, we don't care about detractors because they obviously don't like us, so we don't like them. That's not how this works. Everyone definitely matters, but you definitely want to prioritize. So, if you want to double down on the areas that make you better and, again, create those long-term, LTV, long-term value customers, and then knock other people up a little notch, and then, of course, focus on those that there may be a lot to work on, but at least you can get a head start on it. So takeaways. NPS is the answer to the ultimate question. Why are we even doing it? Because it's a predictor of growth and people have adopted it. Use segments. Keep it simple. Set a cadence based on, again, either a milestone or a schedule. Determine your delivery method, benchmark, and then take action. So thank you guys so much. Do you have any questions? Oh, I had pictures. Go ahead. Question?
Yeah, so you've got all this feedback, responsive action stuff going on. Do you tie that back into NPS somehow to see how it's moved NPS over time? Like we did this thing, so NPS has gone up or down? Mm-hmm. So how?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that we've done. For instance, we've gotten a ton of feedback really based on just some small things in Pendo, but a couple of big things as well. So we've added things like goals, and that had to do with a lot of feedback. Like, I want to be able to track this in Pendo. Like, how do I know if I'm doing well? So a lot of things like that, we do take a look at, hey, we released this, and then we'll go back to that graph or that widget to see the NPS over time. Like, did that make an impact? And then, of course, vice versa. I will say we had a release. We were building a whole bunch of stuff, and there was a couple of bugs that were well known from customers. And our NPS took a little hit. We got feedback saying, like, I know the product team's working on this, but I'd really like for this to be fixed. So again, just relating that back has been extremely helpful. So we know that the little things that we work on do actually really make a difference. Yeah?
Do you know if there's a way for the NPS scores to get back to be put into the CRM integration, specifically like Salesforce, when the CSMs are on the phone with their clients and things like that, they can see the
Yeah. The question was, can you get NPS scores into like a CRM like Salesforce? If you're talking about Salesforce, absolutely. We have a Salesforce integration, and we actually do this internally at Pendo, where we push the information from Pendo to Salesforce, and we actually put it in Gainsight as well. So that's a possibility. With that, we have workflows off of it, where we're going to actually use Gainsight to start doing our follow-up emails, so we can track everything and automate a lot of the process. So absolutely, you can do that, and I'd recommend talking to your CSM to set up your Salesforce integration.
That's what I was wondering. You've got Gainsight now, so are you rolling NPS into playbooks in Gainsight and responding that way?
Yeah, we are actually in the process of changing that over. Right now, we're still using Zapier for all of our email follow-ups. However, in Gainsight, we have the ability to just track all of the emails back and forth, so we will be moving over. Back there first, sorry, Claire. This one?
Yeah, and that, after doing a little bit of research and just kind of some internal dialogue, we landed on an NPS survey that was smiley face and sad face.
Mm-hmm.
And then we averaged those out, so we got a score basically where we
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything that we're maybe missing out on from that perspective, like heuristics might offer us, or are there ways if we were to transition our current network to NPS,
Mm-hmm.
which is our overlap over to kind of customize the scale, and instead of 1 to 10, we able to do something like that?
Yeah. So the question was, right now they use a survey, which is essentially a sad face, a mediocre face, and a smiley face. And instead of using a scale 0 to 10. So with that, obviously, I would say any feedback is good feedback. You definitely want to get feedback, so any is better than none, so you have direction and you're working with your customers for the direction of your product. However, the things that you're missing out on is just the standardization of NPS, and again, obviously the faces are simple, but being able to get the qualitative response as well, and seeing on this a broader scale where they lie, because a mediocre face to them may mean maybe a 4 to an 8, which might not necessarily provide as much insight or see where the ones are closest to getting to that smiley face. So again, any feedback's better than none, but it would be a simple transition just to change it to an NPS if that's something you're looking for. So not too much, but just for the standardization. Mm-hmm.
So we're not using that, but this is actually an example I saw where there's a weather app that I use that it actually does a sliding sad to happy face, and it's 10 different faces. And I'm just using it like, oh, this is Pendo. Like you slide, and it's like there's like clearly the 7 face and the 2 face, and I'm sure they just translated. That was the most recent was like 1 had a word above it, 10 had a word above it, and then from like 2 to 8, like how are you qualifying for a 7?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of opinions and like a lot of information around that. Some people use CSAT, some people use other methodology. It's more like if you are going to be doing NPS, this is the approach. But in that case, like I said, any feedback's better than none. Mm-hmm.
I have a question on integration of offline into online. So we do onboarding,
Mm-hmm.
which is self-service online, but then we also have offline training. I want to be able to use Pendo within that offline training, traditional training environment, but I also want to be able to take survey data that we might collect and combine everything and feed it into Salesforce
Mm-hmm.
to create a global NPS for the effectiveness of education.
Mm-hmm. So you're saying with your offline, would you have a different approach for doing NPS, as in like email or something like that? Yeah, so in that case, we can definitely talk more about this, but I'm her CSM. But we can definitely talk more about this where we can actually see, how you're going to administer that, if that information is passable to Pendo, either through the installation or through our integration, our Salesforce integration, and then vice versa, the information from Pendo, because any information you can get into Pendo, you can segment off of, so you can get a lot of the functionality out of it. Yeah. Any other questions? Well, thanks, y'all. This was a lot of fun. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your pandemonium.